What if everything you prefer is actually revealing who you were taught to be and not who you really are? It's a curious paradox. You spend your entire life accumulating preferences, songs you claim as your own, foods you reject, political opinions you defend passionately, relationships you choose, and gradually you start to believe that these preferences are you, that they define you, that they prove your individuality. But Alan Watts saw something different. He perceived that the more preferences you accumulate, the less free you become, because every preference is at its core a prison disguised as identity. Think about this for a moment. You say you love jazz, that you hate waking up early, that you prefer mountains to beaches, and suddenly these preferences begin to govern you. They decide where you go, who you relate to, what you consider possible. You're building a house made of shadows. It seems solid until the light shifts angle. The man who begins to awaken perceives this naturally. He doesn't reject people. He doesn't become a hermit on principle, but something inside him changes. The usual way of connecting stops making sense. The superficial conversations, the automatic smiles, the opinions shared just to belong. He begins to see social masks for what they really are. Performances, arrangements, silent agreements where everyone pretends the connection is real. And in that moment, something inside him grows quiet. It's not rejection, it's recognition, the realization that the person he'd been defending, the identity he'd been protecting through these preferences, perhaps never existed. You are not your Spotify playlist. You're not your vote in the last election. You're not your choice between coffee or tea. These are mere shadows. And shadows prove only one thing: something is casting them. But the shadow is never the object itself. Alan Watts used to say that the ego is an illusion, but he didn't say this as an abstract philosophical theory. He was pointing to something much more concrete, to the fact that everything you call I is actually a collection of learned preferences, of social conditioning, of fears disguised as choices. You learn to like certain things because it makes you belong. You learn to reject others because it protects you. And gradually this collection of likes and dislikes becomes so dense, so complex, that you begin to believe it is you. But it isn't. It's just the game you learn to play, the character you were taught to perform. And the more you insist on defending this character, the further you drift from something much deeper, from something that has no preferences, that doesn't need them. Imagine a river. You can try to hold the water. You can cup your hands, create a bowl, try to capture the flow. But the moment you try to hold it, it escapes. Not because the river rejects you, but because water's nature is to flow. Your preferences are this attempt to hold, to capture, to define something that by nature cannot be defined. And the cost of this is immense, because each preference you add to your identity is a prison you build. Each I am this way is a wall that limits who you can become. Each I hate this is a door you close to life. You think you're protecting yourself, that you're creating security through consistency. But what you're really doing is enclosing yourself in a version of yourself that becomes increasingly smaller. And then comes the fear that if you let go of these preferences, nothing will remain, that without them you'll disappear, that the person you spent decades building will simply dissolve. Alan Watts understood this fear, and he knew that this fear is actually the ego's last defense. The final attempt to convince you that you are this fragile collection of likes and dislikes. But he also knew something you've always sensed, even if you've never put it into words, that the self you fear losing so much never existed to begin with. It's a construction, a narrative, a story you tell yourself every day, reinforced by each choice, by each preference, by each "this is me." And the irony is that you cling to this story tooth and nail, defending it against any threat, without ever stopping to ask, who is doing the defending? If you are the story, who is telling it? The man who awakens begins to ask these questions, not because he's special, not because he's reached some elevated state of enlightenment, but simply because he stops blindly believing the narrative. He realizes that people still wave, still offer polite conversations, but the genuine connection is no longer there. because it never truly existed. It was merely a mutual performance, a silent agreement where both parties pretended it was real. And what emerges in this space is not loneliness, it's clarity, a quietness that doesn't need to be filled, a silence that isn't empty but full, a feeling that for the first time you're no longer playing a role. Most social interactions depend on unspoken rules. You learn to laugh at the right time, to agree when expected, to disagree just enough to seem interesting, but not so much that you're excluded. And when you begin to awaken, these rules stop making sense. Not because you reject them, but because you see through them. You realize that true friendship becomes something quieter, simpler. It's not about sharing opinions. It's about sharing presence. So if your preferences don't define you, what do they reveal? If they're not you, what are they showing? Alan Watts had an answer to this, and it wasn't a comfortable answer. Your preferences are like X-rays of your consciousness. They don't show who you are. They show where you're stuck, where you still believe you need to protect yourself, where fear still rules disguised as choice. Every intense aversion reveals a fear. Every strong preference reveals an attachment. And every attachment is, at its core, an attempt to control something you fear losing. You prefer security? Then you fear chaos. You prefer predictability? Then you fear the unknown. You prefer to be seen a certain way? Then you fear rejection. And the ego uses these preferences to build armor, an identity that seems solid, that seems to protect you, but that in reality imprisons you. Because while you're busy defending your preferences, defending your right to be who you think you are, you're missing something much deeper. The possibility of simply being without defenses, without narratives, without the constant need to prove you exist through your choices. The person who awakens realizes this gradually. They begin to need less, not because they've become ascetic or detached by principle, but because they see that most of what they thought they needed was merely fuel for the illusion. And in this recognition, something extraordinary happens. Distance happens by itself. It's not an active choice. It's a natural consequence. People who live on the surface begin to seem very distant, not because they judge them, but because they can no longer pretend. They can no longer participate in the game of masks with the same seriousness. And here's something Alan Watts understood deeply. This distance isn't the end. It's the beginning of a different way of connecting, one that doesn't depend on agreement, that doesn't need mutual validation, that isn't based on shared preferences, a connection that comes from something much deeper than likes and dislikes. You've always known this deep down, always noticed there was something artificial in this whole construction of identity through preferences, in conversations where everyone just reinforces the same opinions, in groups where agreement is more important than truth. You've always felt there was something more real waiting, something that doesn't need to be defended because it can't be threatened, something that doesn't change with your preferences because it never depended on them. And your preferences are about to reveal exactly what that is. Like mirrors, they don't create anything, they just reflect. And what they reflect isn't you, it's the conditioning, the wounds, the fears, the stories you believed about who you should be. But behind all of this, there's something watching, something that notices the preferences without being defined by them, something that sees the ego without being imprisoned by it, something that's capable of witnessing this entire dance of likes and dislikes with serene clarity. And that something is what you truly are, not the collection of preferences, not the carefully constructed narrative, not the character you play on social media or at dinner conversations, but that which is aware of all of this, that which exists before any preference is formed, that which will remain when all these preferences dissolve. And here's the truth your preferences are revealing. You are not who you think you are. You are much vaster, much freer, much deeper than any collection of likes and dislikes could capture. Your preferences are X-rays of your consciousness, and they're about to show you exactly where you're still sleeping, where you still believe the illusion, where you still identify with the shadow instead of that which casts it. Because when Alan Watts said the ego is an illusion, he wasn't asking you to destroy it. He was inviting you to see through it, To recognize that the self you so fear losing is just a thought, a construction, a mental habit so repeated it began to seem real. And the first step to seeing through this illusion is in understanding what your preferences really are. Not identity, not truth, but symptoms, clues, diagnoses of where your consciousness is still imprisoned. So observe your preferences, but not as confirmations of who you are. Observe them as maps of where you're not yet free. Preferences are an X-ray of consciousness, not a definition but a diagnosis. A map that reveals where you are in the territory of your own evolution. And what seekers understand, what those who begin to awaken perceive, is that you were never using the wrong map. You were reading it the wrong way, because preferences aren't prisons. They're reference points, signs along the path. They don't say who you are, they say where you are. And this is the first revelation that changes everything. When Alan Watts spoke about preferences, he used a simple image, the needle of a compass. The needle points north, but it isn't the north. It only indicates the direction. Your preferences work the same way. They point, they reveal, but they don't define. And the moment you understand this, something inside you relaxes. Because you realize you can have preferences without being possessed by them. Think about it. Your musical taste is like a playlist of your consciousness. Each song that moves you, each rhythm that stirs you, is reflecting an internal state. Not because the music defines you, but because it resonates with what you're experiencing right now. And this changes. Of course it changes, because you change. Consciousness evolves, and preferences follow. But here's the problem. Most people aren't experiencing authentic preferences. They're repeating social conditioning. Inclinations that were installed, not discovered. And the difference between an authentic preference and conditioning is brutal. In Zen Buddhism, there's a concept called no-mind. Mushin, it's the state of observing without identifying, of experiencing without clinging. And when you look at your preferences from this place, from Mushin, something interesting happens. You realize which ones are truly yours and which ones you simply inherited. The preferences you defend most intensely are almost always the most conditioned, because authentic preferences don't need defending. They simply are. Like the air you breathe, you don't need to justify why you breathe. You breathe, but the preferences you inherited from your family, your culture, your social group, those you defend. Because deep down you feel that if they fall, you fall with them. And that's the second revelation. The paradox of preferences. The more you cling to them, the more conditioned they probably are. The lighter they are, the more authentic. This doesn't mean you need to abandon your preferences. It means you need to ask yourself, is this preference serving me, or am I serving it? And when you ask that question with honesty, a lot starts to shift. Because preferences evolve, naturally, effortlessly, like a snake shedding its skin. At each stage of awakening, with each expansion of consciousness, certain preferences simply fall away. You don't abandon them, they abandon you. Because they no longer make sense, they no longer resonate. And this isn't loss, it's liberation. A man who is beginning to awaken may suddenly notice that conversations that once fulfilled him now empty him. Places that once energized him now exhaust him. People who once distracted him now suffocate him. And this isn't arrogance. It's not superiority. It's simply that your frequency has changed. And when the frequency changes, what resonates also changes. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself. And this process is natural. Like the river that doesn't force itself to flow. It flows, and in flowing it changes. It cuts new paths. It abandons old meanders. But it doesn't stop being a river. Your preferences are the same. They change. You change, but you don't stop being you. You just stop being the conditioned, limited, contracted version of you. And you begin to be something more vast, more fluid, more free. Watts called this the wisdom of insecurity. Because insecurity about your preferences is, at its core, insecurity about your existence. If you feel you need to have defined tastes, fixed opinions, permanent inclinations to be someone, you're building a self on sand. Because all of this changes. All of this is temporary. All of this is preference, not essence. And here's the peak, the moment of greatest cognitive tension. The self you're protecting so fiercely, the self built on fixed preferences and rigid identities, that self isn't you. It's your prison. You're defending the bars, calling them home. And the moment you see this, truly see it, something inside you breaks. Not from pain, but from relief. Because you realize that freedom isn't about having the right preferences. It's about preferring without identifying. Freedom is liking something without becoming it. It's choosing without clinging. It's leaning without losing yourself. And that's a completely different game. Because when you prefer without identifying, you can change without dying. You can evolve without fear. You can let go without losing. And that's what Watts was trying to show us all along. The game of identity based on preferences is a game you can never win. Preferences change, and if you are your preferences, you die with each change. But if you aren't your preferences, if you are the space where they happen, then you can dance with them. You can appreciate them while they last, and release them when they leave, without attachment, without existential crisis, without the feeling of losing yourself. And this brings us to the third insight, an understanding that few people reach. Preferences aren't random. They have a structure, a pattern, and that pattern reveals not just where you are, but what you're avoiding. Every strong preference has a shadow, something you're rejecting in order to cling to what you prefer. If you identify intensely with introversion, you're rejecting extroversion. If you cling to rationality, you're avoiding the emotional. If you defend spontaneity, you're running from structure. And awakening involves recognizing these shadows. Not to eliminate them, but to integrate them. Because the game of black and white, the game of opposites, is the game that creates meaning. But identification with one side creates suffering. In Taoism, this is Wu Wei, action without effort, preference without force. When you force a preference, when you cling to it, when you defend it against the world, you're revealing exactly where you're stuck. Because authentic preferences arise naturally. They don't need to be forced. They simply appear. And then you begin to understand. Preferences are like mirrors. They reflect your current state, not your permanent essence. And the state changes. Fears change. Attachments change. And as they change, preferences change too. Have you ever had a song that was everything to you, that you listened to repeatedly, that seemed to contain the entire universe in 3 minutes? And now you hear it and feel nothing, not because the song changed, but because you changed. And the mirror now reflects something else. This isn't sad, it's liberating, because it means you don't need to carry preferences as if they were identities. You can experience them, appreciate them, and let them go when they no longer resonate. And this isn't a loss of self, it's an expansion of self. So how do you actually live with this understanding? How do you navigate a world that demands you define who you are through what you like? How do you relate to people who build entire identities on fixed preferences? This is the part most people fundamentally misunderstand. This is the gap between theoretical comprehension and lived wisdom. And it's exactly here that Watts offered us something revolutionary. A practice, a path, not to change your preferences, but to change your relationship with them. Because insight without practice is just philosophy. And philosophy without embodiment is just talk. But there's a way to embody this, to live this, to make it not just a beautiful idea, but a daily reality. And the practice isn't about eliminating preferences. It's not about becoming neutral, indifferent, or coldly detached. It's about something much more subtle, much more powerful. The practice is about perceiving the space between you and your preferences, the space between awareness and the content of awareness. Because in that space, in that minimal yet infinite distance, lies all the freedom you've ever sought. And here's where truth becomes practice. Because understanding that your preferences aren't you is one thing. Living as if this were real is something completely different. Alan Watts taught something most people missed. He taught that you can observe your preferences without becoming them. That you can notice the attraction, the desire, the repulsion, without needing to claim them as your identity. It's like watching clouds passing through the sky. The clouds appear. They change shape. They disappear, but the sky never becomes the clouds. The sky remains what it always was, vast and open, no matter what crosses its expanse. Your preferences are the clouds. You are the sky. And the first layer of this practice is simple. When you feel a preference arise, whether big or small, don't rush to name it as yours. Don't immediately say, "I'm like this," or "this is who I am." Just observe. Observe the preference appearing. Observe how it behaves. Observe how it tries to convince you it's permanent. The Taoists call this Wu Wei, action without effort, awareness without attachment. You're not fighting against your preferences. You're not trying to eliminate them. You're simply witnessing their temporary nature. And when you do this, something extraordinary happens. You realize you can prefer without being consumed by the preference. You can enjoy coffee without becoming a coffee person. You can value solitude without defining yourself as the loner. You can love intensely without losing yourself in love. This is the freedom Watts was pointing to. Not the freedom from having preferences. The freedom to have preferences without them possessing you. But there's a second layer. And this is where true transformation happens. Because your preferences aren't just temporary patterns. They are teachers. Every attraction you feel, every repulsion that arises, every desire that appears, is revealing something about the unconscious patterns operating within you. When you feel attracted to something, ask, what is this attraction revealing? When you feel repulsion, investigate. What am I avoiding seeing? When a desire arises forcefully, question, what emptiness am I trying to fill? Your preferences are like breadcrumbs, leading back to the patterns you've never examined. They are traces left by the unconscious, signs pointing to the beliefs and fears that shape your experience without you knowing. And when you begin to use your preferences this way, as investigation tools instead of identity tattoos, you discover something profound. You discover that each preference is a teacher, not a tattoo. Each one is showing you something about how you're constructing your reality. This isn't about self-help. It's about self-knowledge. It's about using the very structure of your preferences to reveal what's hidden beneath them. And then you arrive at the final paradox, the revelation Watts reserved for those with genuine insight. Your authentic self isn't something separate from your preferences, waiting to be discovered after eliminating all conditioning. It's not a static identity hidden behind layers of experience. Instead, it's a dynamic, ever-evolving process of awareness itself. It is consciousness observing the coffee being enjoyed. It is the witness noticing attraction without being consumed by it. It is the vastness allowing all experiences to appear and disappear without ever being touched by any of them. The Hindus call this Maya, the illusion. Not that the world is false, but that our identification with it is the illusion. We think we are the characters in the dream. We think we are the preferences, the thoughts, the emotions. But we are not. We are the consciousness in which the dream appears. And Watts knew this deeply. He knew that you are not the content of your experience. You are the context. You are not what is happening. You are the happening itself. You are the universe experiencing itself through this particular form, through these particular preferences, through this particular life. You were never your preferences. You have always been the witness. When you truly see this, not just intellectually, but experientially, everything changes. Preferences still appear. Desires still arise. Attractions and repulsions continue their dance. But you are no longer trapped in them, no longer defining yourself through them. You are free! Free to have preferences without being defined by them. Free to change without fear of losing who you are. Free to be completely yourself because you finally understood that yourself was never something fixed to begin with. And this is what Watts wanted you to see. That you are already whole. That you are already free. That all the preferences you thought you needed to define yourself were just the universe experiencing different flavors of itself through you. Nothing to fix, everything to witness. Your preferences don't need to be eliminated. They need to be seen for what they truly are. Temporary positions in the game of existence, masks that consciousness wears, flavors that life is tasting through your form. And when you see this, you realize something even deeper, that all your preferences are valid. All of them have their place. None of them define you. You are the mirror that reflects everything without being stained by anything. You are the river that allows all waters to flow through it without ever being changed by them. You are the shadow that only exists because the light is present. And all of this is pointing to the same truth. The truth you cannot grasp with the mind, but that you can recognize when you stop trying. Now look at your preferences in this exact moment. Look at the things you think you need, at the identities you think you need to maintain, at the definitions you've built around yourself. What are they revealing? Not about the world, about you, about the patterns you never questioned, about the fears you never faced, about the emptiness you are trying to fill with definitions. And don't try to answer this with your mind. Don't turn this into another self-help project. Just sit with it. Let the question work on you. Because the answers will come when you stop searching with your mind and start observing with your consciousness. And as you do this, remember what Watts truly knew. What he was trying to show those few who were willing to see beyond the game. That your preferences don't define you. They don't even reveal you. They reveal what you think you are. And when you see through this illusion, when you truly see, you are finally free. Free from definitions, free from fixed identities, free from the need to prove yourself or defend yourself or explain yourself. Because you are not your preferences. You never were. You are the vast open space where all preferences dance. You are the consciousness that allows everything to appear. You are the universe looking at itself through these particular eyes, experiencing this particular life, using these particular preferences as a way to know itself. And this, finally, is the liberation that Watts promised. Not the freedom to have the right preferences, the freedom to see that you were never limited by any preference to begin with. You are the vastness, always have been. And nothing that appears in this vastness, no preference, no thought, no identity, can ever change that. You are beyond the game, and you always have been. You just forgot for a moment. And now, if you are paying attention, if you are truly seeing, you are beginning to remember. And you are one of the few who see. One of the few who is willing to look beyond the masks. One of the few who understand that true freedom is not finding the right preferences. It is seeing that you were never the preferences. And when you see this, everything becomes different. Not because you changed, but because you finally saw who you always were.